Welcome to another edition of the It's Cavalier podcast. It's your boy Mack. Joining me tonight is my good old buddy, old pal Bob Schmidt of Fear the Fro Pod. How you doing, man?
Good. How you been, Mac?
We're in that point of the off season already. I know this shit just started, and it feels like it's been forever and a day, man. I'm struggling trying to find ways to keep myself entertained. I know we have some WNBA stuff, and we know all the news that's going on with that. You got MLB and the Guardians who seem to be doing very, very well this season, if you're a Guardians fan. And then there's the NBA draft, along with all these other Cavalier related things, the head coaching search, the Donovan Mitchell extension talks of it all, Isaac Okoro. There's just so many different things going on right now and behind the scenes for these Cleveland Cavaliers. And we're just kind of all sitting in the dark, waiting for all of these dominoes to fall. But man, I'm not going to waste your time here. I want to jump right into it. And one of the things that I think we are all waiting to see happen is who's going to be coaching the Cleveland Cavaliers for this upcoming 2024-25 season. Now, if I'm not mistaken, there have been at least 5 to 6 different big names that have been tied to this franchise now. We got news that Mike Emoni was recently interviewed, or the Cavs got permission rather to interview him. We know Kenny Atkinson and James Borrego are in the mix, along with Chris Quinn and a handful of others. Of these names, is there anybody that sticks out in particular to you, or just makes you feel like, hey, that's the guy for the job, or a guy that makes the most sense here?
I think it's tough with the assistants, at least, to say definitively that, you can look at the systems they come from and hope that they're going to take a lot of the stuff that works in those situations. I do think it's a lot easier to make judgments on the guys who've had head coaching experience, because at least you've got to see how they performed, when they were the ones making the decisions and they had the freedom to do what they do. Borrego and Atkinson, in that regard, I think there's definitely strength to both of them. With Borrego, the offensive end of things seems to be well thought of. I think that's the need that most of us felt like was the main reason why JB isn't there anymore. So in that regard, if my concerns with Borrego would essentially be the stuff that's been chronicled about him butting heads with some of his players in past situations. And when he was a head coach in Charlotte, that was a pretty young team. So I guess there's a part of me that has some concerns that if that happened there, who knows how he's going to mesh.
Managing egos, you think, with
Yeah,
these
well,
star players?
Ball took some shots at him as
Mhm.
far as, he played something like 32 minutes a game and was benched for decisions. Even though statistically he was very good, there was some public discourse about them being at odds a little bit, because Borrego wanted him to not play so freewheeling and rein in some of the mistakes. And on the way out the door, that was some of the stuff that you heard when you're in that period where people air dirty laundry. But you can't really dispute what he did with a team that was very young, to get that kind of offensive production out of them. I wouldn't be upset there. I've said before, I feel like a lot of it for me is just hindsight stuff, seeing who they choose and then seeing how it all plays out. There's things I loved that period with the Nets where Atkinson had all those young guys. I don't think it's an exact parallel to the situation we're in. I think he was more of the parallel to what JB just went through. And now the expectations are ratcheted up even higher with him. Do I hope he could be successful? Yeah. Do I think I'm confident that I know one of these candidates is any better than the other? No. I like Nori's personality from what I've seen. I don't know how it would be with him in charge, but if you were to ask me the guys that I'd be leaning to, I
Mhm.
would probably say of the assistants, he would be the one that I would be leaning towards. I'd be perfectly happy with either of those two previous head coaches, though, and Atkinson or Borrego. So I don't know much about Quinn in terms of, I get that there's an appeal to bringing in a guy who was under Spoelstra, just like with Borrego coming up through the San Antonio tree. But, who knows that bears fruit in the same way that a lot of the players who've left that situation haven't flourished. So I wouldn't say I have a strong favorite. There's not somebody that I'm going to be out here stumping for necessarily, but I would say of the names that I've heard, the three that interest me most are the two with previous head coaching experience, and then Nori. My biggest concern is just, I think obviously who Donovan likes is going to be a big factor, and it's got to be somebody who can coexist with him and the talent that we have on board. So I'm a little more confident of that with some of the guys who are a bit more seasoned, I guess.
Well, I think one of the names that was mentioned specifically in reference to that is Johnny Bryant, right? Who has ties to Donovan in his years with the Utah Jazz, if I'm not mistaken. And so I think when it comes to all of these candidates, I think that was the big reason why part of the reason why it took so long to let go of JB. Honestly, you're looking at the pool of available head coaches. Nobody, prior to Budenholzer being snatched up relatively quickly, um, there's just not a dearth of experienced championship contender type coaches out there. Everybody you are going to be taking a chance with, honestly, even Borrego and Atkinson, right? Guys who, like you said, Atkinson basically it kind of mirrors what JB just went through, like you said.
Well, there's
There's
an argument too for the assistant route in the sense that a lot of times, even when you hire a guy with previous head coaching experience, it kind of feels like
a
everybody.
retread.
Yeah, it kind of feels like that's a limited shelf life in and of itself. And sometimes you get an assistant like a Tibbs or somebody who breaks loose from under someone, and they do have massive success in establishing their own culture. So I'm not closed off. I do like the approach they're taking
Yeah.
of just, we've got the luxury with the Lakers being really the only other ones in the mix to take our time with it because our priorities are very different here too. But what the
True.
Lakers are looking for in a coach doesn't really mirror the same situation that we're in. So in that regard, I like that we have the chance to really do our due diligence. But to act like I truly understand all the stuff behind the scenes, I want to come away with a coach who gets more out of our offense, who keeps Donovan content enough to re-sign, and then we'll see how it plays out next season.
Are those your biggest values? Is that what that is essentially what you're looking for the most with this hire?
The offensive improvement, definitely.
Okay, gotcha.
I think to count on any coach to keep a superstar happy if we don't get results will keep everybody happy. That's ultimately the way I feel, whether they have a pre-existing relationship with Donovan Mitchell or not. But offensively, in the playoffs specifically, is where we really seem to have struggled. So I'm of the hope that rather than we have this debate about, the fit of the guys versus the coaching, well, we know we're taking this step with the coaching. So I'm hopeful that before we have to really be forced to take any drastic measures when it comes to pivoting on the roster, that maybe some of these problems will be ironed out with new coaching. And there's no guarantee of that, but I certainly was at a point where I was ready to make that change.
I think that when you're evaluating changes that you can make, that was usually the first one you can do, right? If you're having the conversation of breaking an established core up, one of the first things that you're going to look to do is, hey, is it at the head coaching position? Is the issue that we're just not getting enough up there? Are these guys not being used correctly? Could we be getting more out of particular position groups? Could we be getting more offensively? Things of that nature. And I think JB, for as much, standing on my soapbox as I did for him, I think the writing was on the wall. It was on the wall for a long time. It took me a while to come around, but at the end of the day, the nail in the coffin was the playoffs. And I thought that JB got these guys to buy in a solid amount defensively, but there were just so many different things that he could not overcome on the offensive end. And so for me, offense, looking at a guy like Dave Adelman, I know he's not necessarily somebody that's being considered one of the top candidates at this point in time. Looking at a guy like Kenny Atkinson, and Borrego for that matter, who helped New Orleans take a pretty huge jump this season in terms of offensive efficiency. That is where I am at right now. I just want to see this offense take a jump, because sometimes it feels like we're stuck in the Stone Ages, Bob. It really does.
No, I mirror your feelings there. I was trying to keep an open mind with JB through most of the season, but your contention windows are so short in the NBA that even though we can sit here and we can say, well, this is only year 2, it's like, just look at the amount of teams that never even made it out of year 3 or never even made it to year 3 before their cores were blown up, because it's a fast changing environment that we live in. And we're coming under that pressure of this new CBA too, where it's like, okay, you only have so much time to make franchise-altering decisions. So, in that regard, when we went through that first round and we struggled as mightily as we did on the offensive end, at that point, I kind of felt like, well, yeah, it's probably going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, all 4 of the core are signed through next season. That's the one good thing. If you do end up saying to yourself, if you're Kobe Altman, and you say, "Hey, you know what? Let's see if a change at head coach can steer these guys in the right direction and get more out of this group." It is good to know that you don't have to necessarily, even with Donovan, it is as shitty as this sounds, you don't have to necessarily, he doesn't have to sign that extension right now if he wants to. The player option is until 2025, 26 offseason. And so if he's saying, you know what, let's see if you guys can show me some sort of improvement. Let's
I personally don't get why he would do it, Mac. Like I know that that's the reporting, and that everybody's like, well, we do this, we'll get him to sign on the dotted line. I don't get the urgency on his end. I would wait it out unless he's seriously concerned he's going to be hurt. It's one of those situations where monetarily nothing's changing in this year, barring a catastrophic injury. So, and even then, I think there's teams who would take that Durant approach of like, well, we'll sit out a season.
right. We'll take that chance to get you under contract.
But I mean, the reporting seems to indicate that people think that he's going to re-up this summer, and maybe he is, pulling some strings behind the scene to get the types of things that he wants with the, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Okay, I'll re-sign if you do that. But if I'm in his shoes, I would ride it out another summer, as uncomfortable as that would make all of us.
Look, we're Cleveland fans, so we're going to push for the guy to sign. But as of right now, like you said, he is under no obligation. And honestly, from a business perspective, from a basketball perspective, just to see which direction this team is heading in, it makes sense for him to wait it out as long as he possibly can. I know we don't want that to happen, but it is a huge possibility. And if I'm not mistaken, he is eligible to sign a 4-year, $208 something million contract, somewhere around that neighborhood. Who knows what can happen over the course of a year? So I totally get why he would want to wait, but you never really know like what is real and what's not when you're talking about these reports out here. So who knows what Donovan Mitchell and his camp has planned? But similar to that, we have been hearing a lot of different things in regards to Darius Garland, man. As a fan of Garland, I'm not going to call myself a fanboy or anything like that, but I want to see the guy succeed after having such just a tumultuous season in many different aspects, especially from an injury standpoint. But specifically in regards to Darius Garland, where are you at personally on the fit between these two in the backcourt? Do you put as much stock into the smallish backcourt as others do?
I would say probably not. I mean, I want to be clear on this, because I think there's people who think you're definitively in one camp or the other. They think that you're either, pro the dual guards, or you want to blow it up and bring in a wing. I would say where I've arrived with Darius is I'm open to listening. I'm open to evaluating on a case-by-case basis. I'm not at that point where there's no world in which I would come off Darius Garland.
Gotcha.
But I do firmly believe that this is a low point for him.
It is.
That being said, though, what I don't necessarily agree with everyone on, even if you go back a year ago to what I think we might say is possibly his best season, that first year alongside Donovan Mitchell.
It was an all-star caliber for sure.
The all-star year, but others would point to that first year and say, well, look, his numbers basically stayed the same, playing alongside a huge usage superstar in Donovan, and his efficiency was great. Even if I think that that's what he's going to return to, I just don't know that I'm 100% convinced that that's the best way to allocate our resources, or that we wouldn't be better served investigating a different construction, whether it be a wing who's more of a two-way player, because I don't think anybody is impugning what, peak Darius Garland brings to the table. I just don't know if everybody is still convinced that some of those redundancies he shares with Donovan Mitchell are, better suited together than maybe taking a little bit of a step back in terms of a secondary backcourt scorer to address, getting some more two-way play on both ends, where we're not so dependent on these two who, while they both have, great moments, I don't think anyone was super pleased having a second postseason where we didn't get what we wanted. I mean, you could make the argument that in the Knicks postseason, Darius was one of our best performers. And then this time around, like Donovan shows up and Darius struggles mightily.
Yep.
It's you don't get long to prove that something's going to work. And I hear the argument all the time about the net rating. Kobe trotted it out in the press conference. And you know, when I get into the regular season doing these pods every day, I try to remind people that, you know, you got to look at the whole sample.
Big picture.
But if there's such a massive disparity between the regular season and the postseason, I'm just off the idea that I'm going to come down on people who say, I push back on it more in the regular season last year. The notion of, well, the playoffs is the only thing that matters. None of this matters. And I would push back on that in the regular season. But now that we have 2 postseasons of samples, it's hard for me to sit here and say that it's an invalid concern to point to what happens in the postseason and say, well, that is telling us a dramatically different story than what we've seen during the regular season. And a lot can be, you know, I don't want to remove the qualifiers, the health and all those things. And I agree with all the Darius supporters who believe, well, this is not what you should necessarily be eager to make decisions on, thinking that this is Darius Garland. But I guess what I'm saying is, even if he returns to form, I'm just open to the idea that I would listen to alternative constructions at this point and then evaluate them on a case-by-case basis.
I think that's totally fair. You know, coming into the 2023-24 season, if you would have told me that we would see this now 2 seasons in a row where the backcourt just cannot find consistency and be on the same page and be on in the same game. Too often it felt like, hey, you know what? Darius is going to go off, or Darius is going to have a good game, and then Donovan's going to struggle, and vice versa. And then this season, obviously, with the Darius Garland injuries, it was way more Donovan carrying the load offensively, obviously. And then you saw that play out like times 10 in the postseason. Darius Garland would have a few moments where he would show a glimpse of the all-star caliber player that we know he is capable of, but he could not do that consistently. And you have all these different question marks in regards to him. And I can't help but wonder, has this kind of driven a stake in between the two, or is there some friction now, or is there some, because it's being reported obviously that Darius Garland is going to seek a trade if Donovan Mitchell signs that extension. And again, we don't know. We have to take it with a grain of salt, but I can't help but wonder to myself, these guys are human, right? They hear all these things that are being said, all these things that are being reported. I can't help but wonder whether or not there's kind of small bits of tension, maybe boiling up between the two.
There may be, but I kind of look at it somewhat similar to the way that how the Kyrie LeBron thing played out. I mean, Donovan had a phenomenal postseason, had an incredible season when Darius was out. And for as supportive as he was of Darius during the whole time, like when he came back and, you know, after he'd make shots, putting his arm around him on the bench, saying, you know, take those shots, do all that stuff. Who knows how Darius receives that? I'm sure there's an element of ego involved, but I also don't like to take the actions of the agent and attribute those.
Yeah.
Now, Darius is complicit in the sense that man works for you.
He ain't saying shit
there is some responsibility. If you don't rein him in, people are going to pin that on you. But I also think that's one of those situations where I think the way it's being framed is probably not the extent to which Darius feels. I don't know that he'd be unhappy getting out of this situation and feeling like he truly has a scenario where he can control his own fate or whatever. But as far as the way that Rich Paul conducts himself, I don't like it. I don't like this idea. Even that whole article with Chris Haynes where he's talking about, you know, being an agent is so much more than signing the deal. It's like, dude, basically what you're trying to convince me of is that it's noble to just disregard the contract that you signed and undercut the team who just gave you a max contract by publicly advocating for trade. Fuck that. Like that behavior. People can tell me, oh, well, it's good business. It may be good business, but it's dirty business. I don't like that approach to things. And if there's one thing that would bother me here, it's that I wish Darius would draw a line in the sand and say, this team is not done wrong by me. What I did this year, my failure to live up to the expectations of this contract or this fan base, that's solely on me. And some of it's unfortunate things like the jaw and the injuries. But at the same time, don't let your agent do that shit. Like you may get what you want out of it. You may get moved to a team where they have to give back less because he's treated as a leveraged asset. But what you're essentially doing is letting your agent burn fan capital in the process and the way that you're going to be perceived if and when you ever do get moved. And is that worth it? Maybe it is to him. I don't know. But maybe I'm just too much of an idealist in this regard. But I don't think the Cavaliers have done wrong by him. Kobe came out of the gates citing all sorts of analytics, saying that he didn't want to move him, talking up his value. Donovan has built him up all along the way. If he doesn't want to be here, I mean, that's a decision for him. He has to decide what he values, whether it be the most competitive situations, whether it be a team of his own. But I don't think it's a valid thing to be upset about, because you're not going to win anything in this league without somebody the caliber of a Donovan Mitchell. And if you can be that guy, be that guy. Nobody's stopping Darius from doing that. That's the common refrain. Every time he has a dud of a game is people don't mind misses. They just want aggressive play.
Yeah.
He could shoot 25 times. It's never about the percentages. It's about imposing your will on the game. That's usually where he takes most of the bullets.
I think that you as a fan, you watch players like Tyrese Maxey and Jalen Brunson. There's countless others out there that just show a constant attacking mindset, guys who go out there and get theirs, right? And you see Darius Garland often take a back seat, and that frustrates people. You just see how timid that he could be at times. And make no mistake, I am not calling Darius Garland timid at all. I'm saying that sometimes he can play like that. And I think, at certain points, it has made him the scapegoat in fans' eyes to some degree. And I think this thing with Rich Paul going on, it's not helping. And my problem with Darius at this point in time is that he's not saying anything to dispel that. The same way that people get mad at Donovan Mitchell for not squashing any of these rumors that we keep hearing in regards to him and his affinity for other locations. New York, we heard that all last offseason, and Donovan not really coming out and saying anything. I know he's not really incentivized to do so, but this is the thing that really gets under my skin a lot of time with these reports, is that you see players where they could just come right out and say, you know what, this isn't true. We could refute it. And we saw Don do that earlier this offseason, right? Where we kind of responded back and denied Are
you talking about the cap?
Yes, the cap tweet. That's cap. I think it was even something that he liked one of my tweets on.
This is not going to be a popular take.
Sure.
But I have kind of wanted to say this. I just think it's better when I speak it in verbal form, because I'll get bludgeoned to death if I was to convey this on Twitter. I kind of felt sympathetic for Fedor.
Come on.
No, hear me out. Just maybe I'm completely just head up my own ass. But here's what I would say. This idea that we're going to sit there and read that whole article from Shams, where the only conceivable source had to be somebody in Donovan's camp. And then we're going to take when Fedor says something and say, well, this guy was full of shit, but we'll give a pass to Shams and everybody else on it. The only reason Donovan responded, and the only difference between those two articles, was that Shams never said him by name and that Fedor said him by name. But anybody reading that with any sense of common sense knows what both articles were being attributed to. And Donovan, maybe he felt like he had to respond because Fedor did mention him by name. But all these people who attacked Fedor is like, this guy's clearly full of shit and he doesn't know what he's talking about. It's like, we're so willing to accept it when just because the guy's name wasn't attributed before and Donovan didn't get angry about it. I'm not saying Donovan isn't justified in getting upset, because when his name gets linked to it, he has to then answer the questions. It's fine to be upset about that. But let's not ask like there was any tangible difference between the way that Fedor approached it and the way that Shams did, except for that one little thing. And that's the part that I think is kind of ridiculous. And I get it. Like, Fedor is a whipping post for this fan base a lot.
I think it's some of it. I understand what you're saying, and I get that. I get what you're saying.
I'm not saying universally Fedor's never done anything to rankle me, but that particular one, I mean, I kind of thought I thought it was a little over the pale. I don't know.
Okay, that's fair. You know what? That is actually a rational. That is a rational opinion in regards to that, and I applaud you for actually bringing that to the table. Because if you would have said that on Twitter or X, whatever the fuck people call it
I'd
these
have to
days,
cut my account down.
yeah, people would be in your mentions calling you X, Y, and Z. And I'm glad that you didn't go that route with that. But yes, that is rational. I get that. I think a lot of it with Fedor, though, is just past things. Like people are
Well,
just so
yeah.
fed up with him.
April, Chris, like, oh, I get it.
Uh,
I get it. But now I kind of feel like it's built up this mob mentality to the point where I'm like, all right. I mean, can we take a little step back and just like evaluate things on a case by case basis?
I think that's fair. Yeah, that's fair. And so even with that being said, Donovan, him coming out and saying that, just in my opinion, I thought that, I liked to see that just a little bit, because in regards to Darius, you're not seeing him come out and mention anything about these rumors in regards to this possible trade with, with Rich Paul saying what he's been saying and all these different leaks and whatnot. It would go a long way, at least in my eyes, to the fan base if Darius would come out and just squash it right away.
Oh, it would go a huge way. Like, especially with this fan base. If take Darius out of it. If anybody took that tact where they were like, if anybody just cucked Rich Paul on a public level like that, he'd be a hero to whatever fan base he's a part of.
People are really starting to hate Rich Paul, man.
It's just the tactic. Like, yes, Rich Paul does it again and again, so I'm bringing him up. But I've never been a fan of, you're in a situation where they have done everything they possibly can. They gave you the most money they possibly can. They gave you all the opportunity you could ever ask for. And the only thing that caused you to fall short of expectations were injuries and your own play on the court. The team isn't the bad guy there. So that's one of those situations where, like, if you want out, you only have one career. You got to live it the way you want. But the way you conduct yourself as a professional, I think it's valid. Criticism is valid in that regard. Some people are just so desensitized to it in professional sports that they'll literally overlook anything, because we're in this era of player entitlement and it's a business. And that's just what gets used, trotted out to justify every single bit of behavior.
As Tom K says down here, hope DG doesn't go down Kyrie's second fiddle path.
Amen.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all hoping that, Tom. And I don't, from just an overview of his career, it doesn't seem like DG is that type of player. We haven't really heard too many leaks, at least, in my estimation, things that I've seen. I don't think DG is that type, and I don't think he has that mentality of, I never really wanted you here in the first place, like Kyrie kind of did at times with LeBron. But who knows? Things change over time, and that's hearkening back to our discussion about Donovan not necessarily having to go the route of signing on the dotted line right now. A lot can change over a year's time, and I'm sure that there was a lot of excitement between the two when Donovan first, joined, the ship. But who knows? Who knows what's developed over time over these last two seasons?
I worry about the same way I worried when Kyrie had the Team USA stuff and Kobe was in his ear and everybody was propping him up. That's the way I feel about the clutch influence on Darius to some degree. I'm like, I don't know that there would be this wedge being driven between the two. I'm not sure what would be the cause of that, because I truly do believe Donovan has been an incredible teammate to all of these guys publicly. Absolutely. At least, unless he's a total asshole behind the scenes and none of us are aware. The stuff with Merrill at the All-Star game, you would have thought him and Jarrett Allen were best friends. The way that he stood up for him, Karras, he stumped for publicly a ton of times when Karras gets called out for his inconsistencies. I can't imagine. I mean, he seems like a very well-liked guy. Unless he's pulling the wool over all of our eyes, Donovan, I mean, then, he's fooled me.
You would have to be one hell of a magician to do that right now. I don't see it in his character to be that type of dude, but who knows? I mean, I feel like we've gotten to the point with Donovan where we're just like, dude, are you going to stay or are you not going to stay? At least that's where I'm at right now. I've never been of the mindset that things are going to go down the shitter if Donovan leaves. Obviously, there's a decline. There's a decline incoming, but if Donovan stays, I feel great as well. But
Well, one thing that's nice if Donovan
Sure.
leaves is that we're in this summer where there's different factions as far
Mhm.
as like, oh, I want to keep the team together. I want to trade Garland. I want to trade Garland and Allen. I want to just trade Allen. I want to trade Donovan. Whatever the feelings are. If we go down this road and we just dig in and we get to next summer and Donovan's like, I'm out. Now you just have to trade me to somewhere where I want to be and take. At least there's no regret you can have beyond it was forced upon you, and whatever you do to pivot, whatever you do to recoup, well, that was the exit avenue at this time. When you pull these rip cords before you're technically forced to, there's a lot of, well, what would have this other road have led me to? Or what would have that been? That won't exist if we decide to dig in on the Donovan thing. All we'll be wondering then is, could we have got a better return if we
Right.
punched out earlier? But
So
it won't be a matter of did we get rid of the wrong guy or did we get rid of the right guy? Because we would have always known. I mean, Donovan was going to be gone no matter what. It was just a matter of did we identify the right time to move him if that was the case.
yeah, or I mean, even the avenue of could we have sold him down the stretch? Could we have changed his mind? Things of that nature. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think when you take a big swing like this with the Donovan Mitchell trade, however people feel about it at this point in time, whether they feel like they gave up too much or not, this is always a possibility that was coming along with it. And I think anytime you can acquire a top 15, top 20 player, you do it.
Especially with 3 years of control left.
Yes.
Younger than 26 years old. It's unprecedented to have a guy like that move to a market like ours in the prime of his career with multiple years to try to win his favor. I have no regrets about taking a big swing because he still will maintain so much value. Even if we ride this out for the whole next year, this is not going to be something where we get no return. Will we ultimately come out with better assets than we entered into this situation with? Probably not, but there's also a value to having this 3-year window where we tried, where we went all in versus just playing the internal development, slow, methodical build type approach that other teams take. And sometimes that leads to equally nowhere.
I mean, rarely do you see a team not pull off some type of big move and win a championship, right? Everybody has to take risks at certain points in time, especially if you're a small market team. There's no way in absolute hell they were going to get a player Donovan Mitchell's caliber without pulling something like this.
No.
Guys, traditionally, they just don't sign big name free agents.
Well, and talent on that level generally does not move via unrestricted free agency. It's almost always sign and trade. So, I mean, you can look just even at the Pacers to make that move for Pascal Siakam. They could have waited until the summer and tried to do it with cap space, but they gave up assets, obviously nowhere near what we gave up for Donovan, but it was still a calculated risk. He could walk away. There's no guarantees that he doesn't go to a Philly or somewhere else, but they did it. And it paid off. It got them deep, deep into the playoffs. And those are the types of moves that can be difference makers that I think, it's always worth when you're in a situation like our franchise, a small market with a bunch of young guys on early deals where they're not signed into huge money deals yet, and you are financially flexible to do it. It's always worth big swings, even when they don't work out. I would much rather a GM operate that way than tentatively and conservatively all the time.
I mean, Kobe Altman has been known to take swings, big swings like that. He's also been known to kind of sit on his hands at points in times, much to the chagrin of fans, whether you believe it was the right move or not. But one thing I will never fault him for is taking that big swing. One of the guys that I really wanted to get your opinion on because of the aptly named Fear the Fro podcast, right? Jarrett Allen. We saw so much vitriol and hatred being thrown his way after the Knicks series. He comes back. He has a very, very good regular season. I thought that he righted all the wrongs. I felt like he stumped out a lot of the narratives that were written about him. And he was really, really balling out in that Orlando Magic series before getting his rib pierced. That was the word that Kobe finally came out after so long, after it being reported in numerous ways. He finally came out and said that he had a pierced rib. Now, Jarrett, he took a lot of hits. He took a lot of hits in the media. He took a lot of hits from the fan base. People feel like it's really time to move on from Jarrett Allen. You being the Fear the Fro pod host, are you ready to move on from Jarrett Allen? Have you seen enough from Evan Mobley to switch him over to the 5? Or are you indifferent at this point in time?
I wouldn't move him yet. I'm not saying it won't ultimately. Here's what I will say. Evan Mobley won a lot of favor with me with his postseason run where he had to man the 5 alone. That being said, I'm not urgently looking to move Jarrett Allen, even if we eventually land there. I think there's a very likely reality that when Jarrett Allen reaches the end of this contract, keeping both of them together will not be financially maintainable. That being said, that there's still a long runway between now and then. And for everyone that wants to look at Jarrett Allen and say, well, you can't pay a guy in a timeshare who can only play one position, the 5. You can't pay him to play half of the minutes at center, $20 million a year. People are in for a rude awakening when they see what $20 million gets you in 2024, if they're not already aware.
We're seeing that Isaiah Hartenstein, former Cavalier, might receive $100 million contract.
And this was a guy that we wouldn't even give a qualifying offer to because he wanted his free. I mean, supposedly that was the team doing him a solid since he wasn't going to get playing time. But even that said, guys like Claxton, guys like Hardenstein, if an average starter to supreme bench player nowadays is getting you $20 million, what you need to ask yourself is Jarrett Allen a top 6 player on this Cavalier roster? He absolutely is. The idea that he's overpaid at $20 million, that's non-existent anymore. So then it becomes a matter of how much value will he lose the longer we go towards his walk year. And that was the situation that the Toronto Raptors faced with OG Anunoby. You could say that had they pulled the trigger a year earlier, they probably would have got a lot more than what they got from the Knicks. But that being said, what I would say about this specific Cavalier construction is I'm open to the idea that Allen will probably eventually be moved.
Okay.
I will say, though, I think it'd be silly to do it before we have somebody who can eat minutes in that front court in place who isn't Tristan Thompson or Marcus Morris shitting on him. I think this draft is an important one to address adding a big man, even if it's not a backup 5. And I do think we should be open to taking backup 5s. If we can't find the stretch guy that we want, if we can't find this 4-5 player or 3-4 player that we want, I think backup big man is definitely a need, if for no other reason than to future-proof yourself somewhat. You don't necessarily have to address it in the draft, but you should be considering it with your exceptions. And in terms of my desire, I still believe that Jarrett Allen, I think he had a better regular season than Evan Mobley. I don't think that can be questioned. And while Evan Mobley was tremendous from the point that he went down, it would be foolish to say that Jarrett Allen wasn't having a dominant beginning to the postseason before he went down with that injury. So this idea that they can't work together, I'm far more concerned about the fit of the guards than I am about the big men. And a lot of that is financially dictated. There is a lot more latitude for whatever we get out of Jarrett Allen at his price point than there is for whatever we may get out of Darius Garland. So I wouldn't say I'm eager to move him. I think I'm coming to terms with the reality that the team is clearly going to prioritize Evan over Jarrett. I will not say that I think that's a slam dunk, 100%. I'm 100% certain that move is going to work out. I think Jarrett Allen is wildly underrated. I think sometimes people look at a guy that you drafted. I think Darius suffers from this too. And they place so much more value on him because he happens to be a guy that you found and drafted, as opposed to, well, we brought in this guy who was seemingly just thrown away by the Nets. And I think there's a tendency to take that for granted at times. But I'm also a realist. Jarrett's days are numbered because we don't have the control over him that we have with Mobley. And if Isaiah Hartenstein and Nick Claxton can command 20 to maybe 25 million on the free agent market, Jarrett Allen is in line for 30 mil probably by the next contract.
Sheesh.
I mean, maybe not. The center position tends to depress things a little bit, and maybe the fact that he's not a stretch big, but not. I mean, Claxton isn't. Hartenstein.
Man, he's maximized like just about whatever you can get out of that role, though. The role that he is in right now, he is
elite defender, can finish with both hands, very good passer, decent foul line shooter. Not to say he's great there. I think that would be the biggest thing that I'd hope to see, is just a little more willingness to take those at the beginning of this next season. But I also, the writing's on the wall. If you give Evan Mobley a rookie max extension, there's almost no world in which you can go into a situation where you're not willing to play the two together. Now, if this next coach believes that these two can roll out together and he finds a way to make it productive, and that all the things that we've thought get gummed up about the offense, we find out they're truly about JB's incompetence, well, then I'll be the happiest guy in the world. But I think we're on borrowed time. I wouldn't be in a rush to just do that this summer because, we've got to address this fit thing. Let's see what the coach can do. We've still got a decent runway with Jarrett Allen on this deal, a couple more years. So let's play it out. I still think he's going to have immense value to someone, whether he's traded before the deadline, next summer, whenever it may be. You just don't want to find yourself in a position where you're not going to retain him and you're still holding on to him all the way to that final trade deadline in his walk year, because then you're probably going to take some leveraged bullshit return like what eventually the Raptors had to do with Pascal and OG by just waiting a little bit too long.
His value could be depreciating.
Sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So
I
totally understand.
Rights, just like with Donovan, obtaining that, guys, that has value. It had value to us, even though we barely had to pay anything to get it from Jarrett Allen. We brought him in despite having Drummond there, because there was a value to having a guy who you could overpay to keep on your team, or who you have the match rights to. So
I think that's with Jarrett Allen. For me, I am just at the point now where I have resigned myself to the idea that Evan Mobley is eventually going to take over at the 5. I think that is where the Cavs ultimately would envision him at, with maybe a floor stretching presence at the floor as well. I know with the 20th overall pick in the draft, there are a number of different directions that they could go in. For me, there's a handful of guys out there that I like, but if they're going to go the backup big route, I love Deron Holmes out of Dayton. I'm a Dayton boy. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio. That is my hometown. So I like to see all these Dayton guys do well. I'm still pissed as hell that Obi Toppin did not get the opportunity to try and lead Dayton to a national championship during COVID. It still burns me up inside. And so I'm really pulling for Deron. I hope that he ends up, honestly, with the Caps. He has kind of morphed into my top selection, my dream.
He shut it down, right? Shut down practices. There's rumors that he has a promise.
Somebody's promised him, yes. And I'm hoping that that's the Cavaliers, but it probably won't be. We'll see.
Well, being that I keep seeing him mocked, 25, 26 or after. So I would think if he shuts things down, he has a promise considerably higher than that.
CBS just ranked him. CBS just mocked him at 22, the Cavs. And you got to take all these mocks with a grain of salt, obviously. But I would love to see him be that backup 4, backup 5, because people consider him undersized as a 5. And I think that he's a perfect fit, in my opinion. He is a perfect fit. He's plug and play. You can put him beside Evan Mobley or Jarrett Allen for his ability to space the floor. He can rim run. He can defend, block shots. Does a lot of different things out there. I'm not going to steer too heavy into the draft conversation, but what I will say, just in reference to the Jarrett Allen of it all, it really, really sucked to see him exit, man, because he's, prior to exiting in the playoffs, if I'm not mistaken, he was the league's 3rd leading rebounder through those playoffs, right behind Jokic, right behind Davis. And for a long point of that series against Orlando, he just kind of seemed like the best player on the court.
Absolutely. I mean, for most of the regular season, I think you could make the argument that when you factor in, Donovan's health falling off a cliff after the All-Star break, Jarrett Allen might have been the most valuable player for the Cavs this season.
He was certainly the most consistent.
Yeah. It's just, it sucks that he plays 81 games in a row. He leaves the way that he does. And because of the Cavs' consistent pattern of just obfuscating injury stuff and being purposely vague.
We'll see. JB, always with the we'll see. I hated that.
I don't think it did Allen any favors. But that's the thing. It's like, and then in the aftermath to see that shit about, he didn't follow, he unfollowed. It's like, no, dude, how many times do we have to be told he doesn't live on social media? Like, let's stop attributing this shit to him. The dude takes enough bullets. It's like 2 seasons in a row that end, withering like this. and the dude just gets 3 months of being treated like garbage. And
How did you feel about the Marcus Morris interview? Because I didn't
that guy.
necessarily love that.
I hated that. It's
Yeah.
like, bro, what is there to be gained? It's this bullshit. I'm so tough. I would have played through it.
I can't speak for Jarrett Allen, but I would
Yeah,
have played through it.
like,
Yeah.
it accomplishes nothing. One, it makes me I wouldn't want him back in there. If I'm Jarrett Allen, I wouldn't want that guy back in the locker room. He didn't do me any favors. Now, maybe Jared's above it because he's not living on social media in the offseason, but by the same token, dude's been here a few months. I loved what he did on the court. Outside of that interview with that show, which I don't even like to begin with, because I think it's just every time I see them in the news, it's just for stirring shit or some terrible take from Chandler Parsons. So to go on there like that,
The man who has stolen so much money in his career, it's crazy.
yeah, the morally righteous one who will tell you about toughness and all this shit. It's like, to go on there and do that serves no purpose. It makes me question, does he even want to be here? I think he probably sees this as just, well, this was a temporary stop. I'm not going back there, because who would conduct themselves like that? But secondly, I just hate that type of shit from those guys. And it's always the enforcer types who like to get out to the media and put forth this narrative about how tough they are. And this time it's at the expense of someone who's arguably one of the nicest guys on the team.
I didn't like any. Yeah, I just didn't like the way that he's being portrayed. I thought, like, again, he's taken a lot of shots this offseason, similar to the way he did after that Knicks series, and I hated it, especially coming off the regular season that he had, and then the pretty dominant stretch that he had against Orlando. So that it sucked ass to see him go out like that. And for that, if he's moved this offseason, which I very much hope he is not, if he goes out like that, it's just going to eat me up inside, man.
It will be unfortunate. And it'll be unfortunate because he didn't get to steer the narrative at all. The team was dictating what was out there. He was silent. We don't know to the extreme that the injury was. Then there was the Shams article. We don't know what the truth is about the injection stuff. I saw stories about, oh, well, it's, he was hesitant because of what happened to Tyrod Taylor. And it's like, well, imagine hearing him convey that in his own words and then still being the kind of asshole who would go out there and call him soft and everything. I don't think we would have got that same storyline. But because he's silent and just rises above the fray in this type of situation, it's yet another season where he's going to be dragged, where Darius is going to be dragged. It's just unfortunate. And all for what? So that Marcus Morris can get, 2 days worth of social media run?
That's exactly right. I mean, he definitely comported himself like a man who does not envision himself back in Cleveland. And from a skill set perspective, he was a good fit here. So that kind of sucked to see him do that.
Game was incredible. That's the thing.
Was.
Like, I thought he completely shut down all of the concerns that I had until the postseason. And then I'm like, all right, this is why I hated the guy.
Yeah, he had a checkered history. Fans, either love him or hate him most of the time when he's on your team. That said, a player that we could also be seeing the last of, and I've seen you reference this on social media as well, is Isaac Okoro, who is entering restricted free agency, and we know that there's a lot of different directions that this could head in regards to retaining him or signing, trading him, or just hoping that he ends up developing. There's just a lot of different avenues that this team can go in regards to Isaac Okoro. Where are you at in regards to him?
It's very simple. I think the majority of the fan base who, is really engaged feels the same way, which is, doesn't matter how you feel about Okoro as a player. You simply can't lose the asset for nothing. Now, I don't believe as firmly as many of the people do that I think ultimately the Cavs are going to give him what they feel like is an acceptable deal that will keep him content and from being upset with his situation. Do I feel confident that if we did nothing, if we just said, you know what, Isaac, you go find somebody to give you the full mid-level. Do I think he could find that? I think there's a good chance that he could find someone to give him the full, non-taxpayer mid-level. I think there's a good chance of that given what people are getting nowadays. But that being said, if you're the Cavs and somebody does that, you just match it. Now, I wish we were the kind of heartless operation that would be like, you know what? Let's make somebody tie up an offer sheet for a couple of days here and then match it. Because I think, similar to what happened to PJ Washington, last year, similar to what happened to Lowry Markkanen before him. There's a chance that the teams with cap space will be looking at other avenues first. For as much as we may love Isaac for what he does, the idea that some team is coming into this summer like the Lakers did with Mozgov saying, you know who will change us is Isaac Okoro. That's the missing piece. I don't think that that's very likely. Now, I think the vehicle of the, non-taxpayer mid-level exception means that somebody probably will eventually throw that at him. But I wouldn't mind seeing the Cavs drag it out a little. Ultimately, though, what I think will happen is they will give him a couple $100,000 over that, per season to sign his deal. He won't even make it to the offer sheet status where somebody could try to poison pill us, and he'll be back on the Cavs. Now, I don't think that guarantees his long-term future here. I just think the Cavs are aware that without draft capital coming up beyond this draft, there's very few chances to have. You can't lose talent for nothing. That's the be-all, end-all of it. We wouldn't do it when we had LeBron. We gave Tristan the deal he wanted eventually. We gave JR the deal he wanted eventually. You just do it. It's what he's getting paid may not be indicative of how important he is in the hierarchy of our team, but it's with the hope that, okay, if we have to move him, he just has to be on an acceptable deal. He doesn't have to be on a supreme value deal. Now, a supreme value deal to me would be, Nesmith or below. That's not happening. If we got him for anything less than $12 million, I'd be stoked. But I think the reality is you should brace yourself for slightly over the non-taxpayer mid-level exception figure. So,
scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that Isaac Okoro will be a Cavalier in 2020?
I'm a 10. Like I saw an article from Woike in the LA Times saying, well, the Cavs would think long and hard about the taxpayer middle. It's like, no, they won't, bro. The taxpayer mid-level is $5 million. If you told me I could have Okoro for $3 million less a season than we're paying George Niang, I would pay the Lakers to get him to sign that offer sheet. I would give them assets to get Isaac to sign that offer sheet because that would be such a supreme value. There's always this. It's the fucking Lakers, man. Like they just have no perception of what guys' value is outside of their own little ecosystem. But Isaac is definitely in that realm where you can look at all the deals last summer. You can look at what Cole got, $13 million a season. You can look at what Danny Avdija got, like $14.5 million a season. Nesmith, $11 million a season. We're 1 year later. Everything just creeps up. Look at the wide receiver contract. So Isaac, mid-level is his market. Whether we're upset with his offensive progression or not, somebody's going to give him that. And if it's not us before we get to the offer sheet, it's going to be us after we match the offer sheet.
Let me tell you, Bob, to see him have just such a woeful offensive playoffs, because I thought he brought the usual grit and grind on the defensive end. I thought he did about as well as he could playing out of position at the power forward most of the time. To see him go out there and just stink it up at times, really most of the playoffs on the offensive side of the ball, not being able to truly space the floor like we had seen him do for large stretches of the regular season, even though it's on low volume, it just killed me inside, man, because I just knew that had to hurt the value. That had to hurt the value there.
That should make you feel better. Really,
it does, but it doesn't.
Make you feel better. I should say it's the glass half full view of it. It's like, well, yes, he stunk it up in the postseason.
that heightens the chances to keep him. Yeah, I get it. I understand what you're saying. I wanted to see the guy have a good postseason showing and just kind of quiet the naysayers a little bit, just from a personal perspective. I'm a huge fan of the guy, but I do understand that you lose a lot of your value in the playoffs if you cannot simply space the floor at the position that he is playing right now. And before we head out of here, one of the things I wanted to ask you is because I know you have seen it being on social media, all these just terrible trades, all these terrible mock trades that we continuously see day after day after day, usually sitting around one of Darius Garland or Jarrett Allen or both at points. Is there an actual realistic trade target that you have on your radar that if you had to move one of those guys that you would want to see return to Cleveland?
When you say one of those guys, you're talking
Jarrett Allen, Darius Garland. Those are the two most likely, in my opinion, to be moved if they do make a move in the core four. Is there somebody out there that you would target?
Here's what I would say. I guess if we're talking Darius, I think the big one that comes up a lot is Ingram.
Mhm.
I've had people ask me that, and send emails into the pod and stuff where it's like, okay, I'm not shut off to that option. I think I have concerns with Ingram. I respect him as an ISO scorer. I respect him as a mid-range scorer. But after 2 years of hearing about nothing but spacing, I think that we have to at least be open to the idea that for as talented as Ingram is, that maybe it's just introducing problems in other areas to solve certain problems we feel with Darius. So in that way, I guess I would say if a deal is, 1-to-1, basically, if we're not talking about a bunch of draft stuff and other people involved, I'm 50-50 on that. I could be talked into it. I would also be fine if the Cavs didn't want to do it. A specific type of construction, I would caution the Cavs away from doing. And I also think this is the problem with most of these hypothetical trades is that you see things like the Heat and the Lakers where it's like, okay, we're gonna, you're gonna trade Donovan for Herro and some first round picks, or you're gonna trade Darius for Austin Reeves and Rui and one first round
That's the
pick.
one that I keep seeing on my timeline.
The problem with those, the thing that just burns me more than anything else in this, trade machine world is that it never considers what the Cavaliers would be trying to do.
Mhm.
If they're getting rid of Darius Garland, it's not to add 2 or 3 lower level role players. And that's this, or it shouldn't be. If that's the thing with Jarrett Allen, where they say, well, we're a little redundant here, so let's give Jarrett Allen away for Larry Nance Jr. and Dyson Daniels. Those are the types of moves that get people fired. Because how short are our memories that we forget that just last December, all of a sudden we were just operating with 2 of our core 4. Injuries can happen. And this notion that we should be comfortable rolling into a season where our contingency plan, if Donovan or Evan Mobley goes down, is Dyson Daniels and Larry Nance Jr. Like that, it's insanity, in my opinion. I will not do those types of constructions. For all of Darius's warts, if Darius doesn't bring back a player who can be at his ceiling equally impactful and important, those are things that I have a much harder time dealing with. And I'm not in the mindset that I get it. We're all upset that we don't have a ton of draft capital due to the Donovan deal.
Mhm.
But I'm not looking to try to coerce Donovan Mitchell into staying by saying, well, look, we got 3 picks back that will convey in 3 to 4 years. Like I don't think that's the way this team is viewing it. If they're going to move off a Darius or a Jarrett, it can't be a trade for trade's sake. It has to make logical sense as to what it will. And that's why I would say, like, if you're going to move a Jarrett Allen, you better be getting, even if it's a worse version of him to man the middle, you better be getting that and another need addressed. It can't just be like, oh, well, we'll take a couple of depth guys when, conceivably everybody that we threw out off the bench, George Niang got played off the floor in the postseason. So in that regard, what we don't need is a bunch, that's not meant as a shot at Niang so much. It's just like there's
I get it.
There's guys who exist in that stratus of player where you expect inconsistency. Darius, that's why Darius takes so many bullets, because people expect him to exist above inconsistency.
Mhm.
And Jarrett Allen has existed above inconsistency for the most part. You can usually pencil him in for about 15 and 10 on a nightly basis. So that's what I would say is I'm not shut off to the Ingram talks. I don't think the Bridges talks are realistic because I think we can be outbid by teams that have first round picks to be thrown around. I agree with the majority that, yeah, from a stylistic standpoint, he would be a better fit than an Ingram. I just don't think he's attainable. When it comes to guys like Paul George and Jimmy Butler, then that is a massive risk move. Those guys might be more attainable because they're as old and injury prone as they are. And so you don't necessarily need the draft capital. Maybe you could construct a 1-to-1 scenario, but I think you have to think long and hard as to if that's worth it. When even, I think if we're being honest with ourselves, even if Donovan Mitchell re-signs, I don't think that guarantees a future in Cleveland. It just slows down the outside noise briefly before it ratchets back up after one disappointing performance next year or whatever the case might be. So I would be real hesitant with those all-in moves for those 34, 35, 36,
the Paul Georges of the world.
And I love Paul George. I do. Like as a theoretical fit, fantastic. But when you factor in salary, injury history, age, and you look at what the rest of this team is, that to me is that's a desperation last swing. I'm going to get fired as a GM move. That's not the first move in shuffling the core.
Well, you don't think Kobe's in that mindset right
I don't
now?
think he should be. I
Okay.
don't want to waste the time on this podcast because I have stumped for him a lot on the Fear the Fro podcast. But I think people who do, like, one of my least favorite ways to evaluate GMs is to go back to past drafts and say, well, Okoro, he could have been Tyrese Halliburton.
Oh God,
It's
I
like
hate that. Yeah.
and that is a thing that people do a lot. But I think if you look at, I think the moves that he's made, no matter how you feel about the Donovan Mitchell trade, the Jarrett Allen move, getting Lauri Markkanen for Larry Nance Jr., some of these undrafted free agent finds that we've had, the moves around the fringes,
Bring
I
Rubio
love
in.
so many of those. And I know people point to the Kyrie one, which first time GM being dropped into that disaster. I'm not saying he won that trade, but look at what he did with all the pieces. George Hill going to Milwaukee, getting the first round pick that's moved for Jarrett Allen, Jay Crowder, turning into what he turned into with Burks coming in and then getting the first round pick from Houston, and all those maneuvers along the way. He turned an absolute shit sandwich into something palatable that we could stomach. And a lot of good things came from that. So I'm not saying he's flawless, but in terms of his drafting prowess, he has more wins than losses. His ability to find some guys on the fringes. And I wasn't expecting something as creative as what he did last summer. Now, you can question the results with what happened with Yang in the postseason, but to come away in a summer where we needed shooting with both Strus and Yang,
it made sense. You're
it
getting
did.
a guy shooting,
and nobody had a
100%.
problem with the approach.
Mhm.
They had a problem with the results. And that to
Right.
me that's what you have to remember when you're analyzing is, how did you feel in the moment? Not how did you feel just with the benefit of hindsight? Because it's easy to say, well, I wouldn't have taken Okoro. And it's like, and there's plenty of people who didn't want Okoro then. But these people who were all like, I knew Halliburton was going to be what Halliburton was. Bullshit. Bullshit. You might have thought he was going to be better than Okoro, but if everybody knew that, then everybody would have taken him.
If everybody knew that, there would be a hell of a lot more draft scouts out there.
Yeah.
A lot of people filling some of these positions that are solely doing so from the confines of social media. But yes, I completely wholeheartedly agree. Kobe, he's had misses, but he's had more makes than misses, in my opinion. And he's turned a city that's not necessarily viewed as a hot destination for talent or free agents, and he's made a formidable team. You can argue whether or not that they are going to be raising into the ranks of contenders next season, but I feel like he's fielded a pretty good contender over the course of the last 5 seasons.
I just want the closure. Like, even beyond how you feel about Kobe, let's give him a chance to play this through. Like, if it fails, yeah, fire him. I'm not, I'm heartless as the next guy. To some regards, I'm results oriented, but he's in the middle of a long play here. He amassed a ton of talent. Maybe it doesn't all fit perfectly, but I would rather he be the guy to try to make the pivots than drop a brand new person in and start this whole process over like we're, the Pistons again or whoever it is, where it's like, okay, we're going to fundamentally take every bit of continuity we have in this front office, the coach and the GM, and we're going to blow it all out. I wasn't ready for that. I think that was too drastic of a move, considering the results, even if they're just regular season, considering the results that we've had the last 2 years and the progress we've made in that regard, despite a ton of injuries.
I think that's totally fair. I mean, they gave JB one last season just to see what could be done given the added firepower. It's unfortunate how that turned out with the injuries. We know usually, the coach is the first person to go in that regard, and JB is no different. And his issues were well documented, and the reason why he was let go is a lot more justifiable, frankly, than letting go of Kobe Altman after what he's been able to bring to the equation.
And can I say one more thing here,
Sure.
which is that the easiest job as a GM in the world is to do a rebuild, where all you have to do is sell off decent assets and get back whatever you can. There are a million GMs that half the league probably that don't have a job as difficult as Kobe, where he is now expected to take promise and turn it into results. And there's a lot of teams making good moves, attempting to stand in his way. So this idea, that's why, I mean, Presti is finally getting to that point where I'm like, we praised him for years before he actually had the results. And now he's getting the results. And now I'm at the point where I'm like, see, this is when we should be praising him. Because anybody can do, the Sam Hinkie, tear it down, amass draft picks,
trust the process
and the bad things. Yes, that's easy to do. It's easy to just sit through those summers where we sucked and we end up at the top of the lottery. And the first step is obviously hitting on those picks. But that next step, it gets exponentially more difficult. So I'm not even saying Kobe will succeed. I just think there's a lot of guys who wouldn't even succeed to the level that he has so far.
I think one of the biggest indicators of that, like where we started versus where we are right now, was his conversation during his press conference in regards to the different conversation that is going to be had in the coaching search now versus what it was back then, and the different approach that they're going to have to take with that now. And that to me spoke volumes about just the state of where the Cavaliers are at in this point of time. And it purely in reference to his own job when he was asked about that. So, for what it's worth, I think Kobe Altman has done a pretty damn good job, despite what a lot of people would say about his tenure here. But a lot of people like to operate with this whole hindsight mindset. That said, man, we've been on here for over an hour now.
Sorry. I apologize to anyone who thinks I'm being a bit of an asshole this podcast.
I'm just fucking with you, man. There are a number of dominoes that have to fall in place for this Cavaliers team, and we're just at the mercy of them, man. We're waiting on the first domino to fall, whether that's the head coach being hired, whether that's Donovan Mitchell committing or not committing, say, I'm the fuck out of here, or you guys, whatever decision he ends up making with that. And then Darius Garland, Jarrett Allen, Isaac Okoro, the draft. There are just so many different things that this team has to address. And Kobe Altman is damn near at the front lines here in regards to all of them. One last question I did have for you, I don't think I've actually gotten your opinion on this, is we continuously hear that Dan Gilbert is going to be heavily involved in the process here moving forward. What do you feel about that?
I don't know what to feel about that. I like that he's willing to spend money. I like that he cares. As far as actual decision making, of the things that jump to mind as a Cavalier fan, there's always the thought of the Kyrie situation, because there was all this discourse about, well, he wasn't willing to just do an all-in now move because he saw the impending departure of LeBron. So they tried to hedge their bet. And that's why they took this Boston move, because it brought back a draft asset and what he considered an acceptable level of talent. Like, if that truly was Dan Gilbert, who prevented whatever you want to say it was, a Phoenix deal for the draft pick, or the Paul George maneuver, we'll never know, because he pulled the plug on Griffin. And I think that's probably the most damning thing on his resume. But I will say, the dude has always spent money to try to compete. And
was Kevin Love was that him? Was that him?
That was some public facing nonsense. Like, whatever. The guy got his money. He was good for it. He helped us win a title. In that regard, it's not my money. Spend it however you want. But that was one of those situations where, like, they did it with Rip Hamilton at the end of his Detroit tenure, where they extended him when he was well into his 30s, well before they had to. And it's like, what are you doing? Like, this is not, like, everybody sees this for what it is. This is a team that is going to waste his talents, and we're going to pay him top dollar to do it. But in a world where you have to hit like a salary floor and some things like that, I mean, I'm not going to be mad that a non-productive player was eating up a huge chunk of the cap, because if we weren't as bad as we were, then we probably wouldn't have ended up in situations to get the guys that we got in the draft. So I have my concerns about Gilbert, but he's got a lot more equity with me, just being a small market owner who is willing to spend amongst the top teams in the NBA. So let's see how it goes. I don't know. I mean, I've never felt like GM should feel particularly safe with his volatile nature in terms of not retaining guys for a long time and a lot of turnover there. But Altman's lasted a pretty long time.
He's been here a while now. What is it? It's been 6 years, right? 7 years at GM or higher.
Yeah. So I mean, it would have been easy for him last summer when Kobe had his stuff to just, if he wanted to, I mean, if he really had an axe to grind, he could have blown him out then. And everybody would have been like, well, we just don't tolerate that in our organization. But they kept him. And he survived despite JB going out. He could have clean shop there. And there'd be a lot of the fan base that wouldn't have been particularly broken up about it. So in that regard, I'm hopeful. I'm excited no matter what happens, I guess. I hope we don't operate from a place of fear. That's always been my feeling all the way through this, is that you went into this with a big, bold move. Don't just pull the plug early out of fear. Let's do what we can to try to make this thing work. And if it fails, I can live with the results.
I get the feeling that they're not going to operate from that place of fear. I think that obviously Donovan Mitchell is going to have a hell of a lot to do with any decision that's made, especially in regards to the head coaching hire. But I feel at peace with the direction that we're heading in. I think we're gonna make something of this offseason, and this is a pivotal one. But it is a rather exciting one because there are many different directions that they go in. I just hope they nail it, or at least make something positive of it. That said, as always, tell you guys, if you'd like to reach out to me, you know how you can. It's Cavalier_pod on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and more. If you'd like to join the It's Cavalier Discord chat, you know what to do. Leave a rating, leave a review, send a screenshot of said review to itscavalier53@gmail.com. I did not fuck that up this time, Bob. I messed that up all the time.
Even so, have all off season to just hammer it in.
There you go. There you go. If you want to join, if you want to support the podcast in a small but rather helpful way, consider joining Patreon as a paid member over there. You guys just don't know how much it helps. I produce this Cavs content all the live long day. You'll see stuff come out daily, but it definitely helps to see support like that. Fro, you got anything going on that you want to tell the people?
Well, I'll just tease it. I won't get into the specifics, but we got some good stuff cooking before the draft. I'm working multiple angles there, but a big collaborative situation that I'm trying to work out with several of your favorite Cavalier commentators as we get closer to draft. So we didn't really dive into that this time, but Mack will hopefully be involved with that in the future, and we'll give you more information as that gets closer. But that's primarily the thing, is I'm waiting out information like everybody else, and I'm trying to get people on to discuss it who can add something to the commentary that they haven't already heard me screaming into the for the last few months. So that'll be the next thing. Just keep an eye on the podcast feed, and new stuff is on its way.
There you go. Bob, I lied. I got one more for you. If Jarrett Allen is moved, are you changing the title of the pod?
I don't know. You know, I am a stubborn piece of shit, Mac. A part of me is like, dig in. Everybody's like, well, rebrand coming. And it's like, well, I don't know. Maybe I won't. I mean, I probably eventually will. There's be a period where I try to hold on to it for a while, and then eventually I really did a shitty job. Like all this 3 years now of building up some sort of SEO recognition, and then yeah, who knows? The woes of a content creator, Mac.
Hey man, that's how it goes. That said, go Cavs. Have a good night.
Yeah, have a good night, guys.